A former FBI agent sat down, reviewed everything publicly known about this case, and reached a conclusion. She said it looks like an accident. Then, almost in the same breath, she said something that quietly dismantles her own answer. She doesn't believe what's publicly known is actually the full picture. So which is it? Are the friends who were with Nolan Wells on Horn Island that day telling the complete truth, exactly as they've described it across multiple separate interviews? Or is there something in what they've said, or deliberately chosen not to say, that hasn't been fully examined yet? And what about the possibility sitting between those two extremes? The one that doesn't require anyone to be a monster, only human, only scared, only capable of making a bad decision in a moment of panic after something already went terribly wrong. Those questions aren't being raised here for effect. Every single one of them reflects a realistic possibility this case currently supports. Tonight, we are laying all of them out, completely, honestly, and with every claim grounded in what has actually been documented. No invented details, no borrowed drama. Just the truth as far as it can currently be known, and a clear accounting of exactly where the truth runs out. If you've been following this case and you want analysis that doesn't collapse the moment someone asks a hard follow-up question, you're in the right place. Make sure you're subscribed to True Crime Revealed and hit the like button before we go any further. It genuinely helps this kind of careful, documented reporting reach people who are looking for it. Now, let's start at the foundation. Nolan Wells was a young black man who went to Horn Island, Mississippi, with a group of friends on what should have been an ordinary summer outing. Horn Island is a barrier island off the Mississippi Gulf Coast, accessible only by boat, part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore. It is undeveloped, remote, and on a warm holiday weekend, it draws crowds of boaters and beachgoers who arrive from across the region. The water surrounding it has been described repeatedly by people who know it well as genuinely dangerous, capable of transitioning from just a few feet deep to over 20 feet within the space of a couple of steps, with riptide conditions that shift without warning and without mercy. Nolan went to that island. He went with friends. He did not come home. His body was recovered from the water, and within approximately 1 hour of that recovery, representatives from the Jackson County Sheriff's Office told his family they believed he had drowned and did not suspect foul play. 1 hour. Before any thorough investigation could have been completed, before a proper reconstruction of his final hours could have begun. That statement, delivered that quickly and with that degree of certainty, became the moment Nolan's family stopped trusting the official account. And it has shaped everything that has happened publicly since. His mother, Christine Wells, has described that window of communication with local authorities as effectively the last real contact the family had with investigators. From that point forward, the family pursued their own path: an independent autopsy, press conferences, national media interviews, sustained public advocacy. Not out of dramatics, but out of a direct and documented response to what they experienced as an unacceptable silence from the people responsible for finding out what actually happened to their son. That context matters before anything else, because the family's public posture, which some have read as aggressive or politically motivated, was built on a specific experience with a specific institution that told them something conclusive in 60 minutes and then went quiet. Now, Jennifer Coffindaffer. She is a former FBI agent, and she is currently providing case analysis for News Nation. She reviewed the surveillance footage that has been made available publicly. She reviewed the documented witness accounts. She reviewed the Coast Guard communications connected to this case. She reviewed the well-documented riptide conditions around Horn Island. She took all of it, applied the professional judgment she spent years building in actual investigative work, and she arrived at a conclusion. When you add it all together, what we see publicly seems to be an accident. That is a real assessment from a credentialed investigator. It is not a guess, and it is not the result of someone picking a side. It deserves to be taken seriously. But Coffindaffer did not stop there. The second half of what she said is precisely why this case has not settled quietly into a closed story and moved on. She added that she doubts the publicly available information reflects the full truth, and that more details could still emerge. She wasn't walking back her conclusion. She was being precise about its limits. She was saying two things at once: that the public evidence points toward accident, and separately, that she does not trust the public record to be complete. Both of those statements can be true simultaneously. Holding them together without forcing one to cancel the other is exactly what honest analysis of this case requires. What makes her assessment worth more than the volume of competing commentary this case has generated is not just her credential. It is what she is specifically not doing. She isn't working from a single viral audio clip. She isn't building a theory on one disputed piece of testimony. She is applying something closer to professional pattern recognition, an understanding developed across years of actual investigative work, that cases involving multiple young witnesses, a chaotic and crowded scene, and weeks of evolving public statements almost always end up more complicated than whatever version has crystallized in public understanding at this early stage. That is not an accusation against any individual connected to this case. It is simply an acknowledgement that investigations of this shape are rarely finished by the time public opinion thinks they are. Here is where the investigation actually stands, because the details matter and several of them have been widely misread. Approximately 60 witnesses have been interviewed as investigators work to reconstruct Nolan's final hours on Horn Island. That number is significant. 60 people is not a tight circle of friends being asked the same questions. 60 witnesses means investigators reached outward, to strangers, to other boaters, to anyone who may have been on or near that island and seen anything that day. Whatever picture eventually emerges from this investigation will not rest on a handful of accounts. It will be assembled from dozens of separate perspectives, cross-referenced against each other, and against whatever physical evidence, GPS data, and forensic findings continue to develop. The 3 friends who were on the boat with Nolan have been formally interviewed. The FBI has been involved in the case, but in a specific and limited capacity, addressing interstate threats that were made against individuals connected to the investigation. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office has remained the lead agency throughout. That distinction between the FBI's actual role and the role some coverage implied they were playing is worth being precise about. This case is now formally headed toward a Mississippi grand jury. District Attorney Angel Myers McGrath has confirmed that every death in Jackson County, aside from natural deaths and non-criminal traffic accidents, gets presented to a grand jury as standard procedure. That is how her office has operated throughout her entire career. The grand jury referral in Nolan's case is not, on its own, evidence that criminal charges are coming. It is the standard next step for any unnatural or suspicious death in that county. Treating it as a signal of imminent indictment misreads how this system works. McGrath has also confirmed that evidence in this case will stay out of public view until the grand jury reviews it first. Her office has been explicit about why. They cannot publicly discuss the evidence, the interviews, or what investigative efforts have uncovered while the investigation is actively underway. She has framed that restraint not as a refusal to pursue truth, but as a commitment to protecting the process through which truth can ultimately be established with confidence. Not everyone reads that the same way. Former Mississippi Judge Carlos Moore has publicly raised concerns about McGrath's office, specifically referencing a separate, earlier case involving a fatal police shooting, where he says overwhelming evidence still failed to produce an indictment. His position is that a grand jury referral should not be treated as automatic proof of progress. Attorney Tyler Bailey has offered the more procedurally grounded reading, that this referral genuinely is standard for the county, regardless of what it ultimately produces. Both of those perspectives are worth holding. This can be routine procedure, and this specific prosecutor's track record can still warrant continued close attention. Those things are not mutually exclusive. Before getting to the 3 realistic possibilities this case actually supports, one word needs to be addressed directly. That word is cover-up. It gets used constantly in coverage of this case, and it gets used as though it means only one thing. It does not. A cover-up could mean something relatively minor, a group of scared teenagers hiding that they had been drinking underage, or embarrassed about a personal detail that had nothing to do with Nolan's actual death, simply not volunteering it when speaking to investigators. That is concealment. It is not nothing, but it is also not what most people imagine when they hear the word. A cover-up could mean something more serious, deliberately deleting messages, or providing a misleading account of a timeline to avoid scrutiny, without any of those actions being causally connected to how Nolan actually died. That category carries real legal consequences, as at least one comparable case has already demonstrated. Or, in the most serious version, it could mean actively concealing knowledge of how Nolan was harmed, obscuring something that happened before he entered the water, not just after. Those are 3 entirely different categories of behavior. They carry 3 entirely different levels of moral and legal culpability. And this case, as it currently stands, has not been shown to definitively land in any one of them. That distinction matters because imprecise language does genuine damage in a case this public. Collapsing all 3 versions of concealment into a single maximally alarming framing distorts what is actually known and what remains unproven. A teenager who deleted a photograph because they were drinking underage out of simple embarrassment is not the same as someone who deliberately hid evidence of how a person died. Both could technically fall under a broad definition of the same word. Only one of them represents anything approaching the level of wrongdoing the most alarming coverage of this case has implied. Now to the three possibilities themselves. The first, and statistically the most common explanation for a case shaped exactly like this one, is a clean, tragic accident with nothing deliberately hidden afterward. Horn Island's currents are documented as genuinely treacherous. The bottom drops off fast and without warning. On a crowded holiday beach with dozens of unfamiliar people spread across a wide stretch of shoreline, no single person is responsible for watching any other specific individual. Under this version, Nolan's friends left Horn Island that day genuinely believing he had chosen to stay behind. Everything since, the missing phone, the inconsistencies in how the timeline has been described, reflects nothing more sinister than scared, imperfect young people handling a devastating tragedy badly, not causing one. Drowning experts have repeatedly noted that real drownings rarely resemble what film and television have conditioned people to expect. A person who is drowning often cannot call out or wave for help because the body prioritizes the mechanical effort of trying to breathe above every other voluntary action. A drowning can look, from even a short distance away, almost unremarkable, until the window to intervene has already closed. On a beach packed with strangers, none of them assigned to watch any specific person, that dynamic is considerably easier to imagine than it might first appear. The second possibility is the one that Coffindaffer's own careful hedge appears to point toward. Under this version, Nolan's death is still fundamentally an accident. Nobody caused it, but something happened in the hours and days afterward. Panic, fear of consequences for underage drinking, fear of the kind of public scrutiny this case has in fact generated, that led someone to delete messages, give an incomplete account, or hold on to information longer than they should have. This is not a hypothetical scenario constructed for this episode. It is a legal reality that has already played out in another state. Two teenagers in Texas were arrested and charged specifically for what they did after their friend drowned, discarding his phone, deleting messages, once they realized investigators were coming. They were not charged with causing his death. They were charged with what they did after it. An accidental drowning ruling and separate criminal accountability for post-event concealment can coexist in law. If something comparable occurred in Nolan's case, it would not require revisiting the question of how he died. It would only require confirming whether specific deliberate actions were taken afterward to protect specific individuals from scrutiny, regardless of their connection to the death itself. The third possibility is the one driving the most public attention, and it is also the one with the least confirmed evidence behind it at this moment. This version holds that Nolan's death was not purely accidental, that some kind of altercation or intervening event contributed to it, and that the accounts given since have been shaped specifically to obscure that fact. The independent autopsy commissioned by the Wells family identified an unexplained area of discoloration. It listed cause and manner of death as undetermined. The examining pathologist stated that non-accidental intervening factors could not be ruled out. Those are significant findings. They are also carefully hedged in the language of a professional who did not have access to everything needed to reach a definitive conclusion, specifically because certain neck structures were retained and therefore unavailable for full examination during the independent autopsy. It needs to be said plainly, this third scenario remains the least supported of the three by anything currently confirmed. No physical evidence has been shown to directly confirm it. No witness has publicly described it occurring. It remains a possibility specifically because the investigation has not produced enough verified information yet to eliminate it, not because anything currently in the public record points toward it with confidence. But it also deserves to be said plainly why this possibility has not been dismissed. The independent autopsy language keeps the door open in a way that an ordinary, uncontested drowning ruling would not. The forensic incompleteness around the neck structures means the independent examination simply could not close that question on its own. And the broader context, a young black man, a predominantly white friend group, a state with a well-documented history that Nolan's family has referenced directly and specifically, gives this possibility a weight that goes beyond the forensic evidence alone. That weight does not confirm the scenario occurred. It does explain why it has not been quietly set aside. Here is the single detail that keeps all three of these possibilities alive at once, and it is worth stating as clearly as possible. With dozens, possibly hundreds, of people on Horn Island that day, no one has confirmed with any real certainty what Nolan Wells was doing in the window between the last moment he was seen and the moment he ended up in the water. That gap has never been fully accounted for, not by the witnesses who have been interviewed, not by the surveillance footage that has been reviewed, not by anything in the public record as it currently stands. That gap is where every single one of these possibilities lives. It is the center of everything this investigation is still trying to resolve, and it is exactly where we are going next. The last confirmed moment anyone independently verified seeing Nolan Wells alive was around 3 o'clock that afternoon. He was talking with Katie McCormack on the beach at Horn Island. After that conversation ended, no single verified independent witness account has been able to establish exactly what he did next, minute by minute, before he ended up in the water. That fact alone is not necessarily suspicious. Horn Island was reportedly packed that day. Dozens of people, multiple boats, a constantly shifting crowd of strangers and loose acquaintances moving across a stretch of remote barrier island shoreline. In an environment like that, it is entirely plausible for someone to genuinely lose track of a specific person for a stretch of time without anyone having done anything wrong at all. People move, groups scatter, attention shifts. But here is what that reality also means. The single most important window in this entire case, the actual transition from Nolan being safely seen on that beach to Nolan ending up in dangerous water, currently has no confirmed independent eyewitness account attached to it. Every contested element that has driven public debate since his death, the phone, the disputed timeline, the differences between the friend group's account and Katie's account, exists specifically because that central gap has never been filled. Everything else in this case radiates outward from that one unresolved core. A crime expert speaking with News Nation called it genuinely shocking that nobody in the crowd reportedly present on Horn Island that day apparently saw Nolan in the water. According to that same reporting, investigators have been actively combing through footage captured by ordinary people, strangers who happened to be on the island that day and may have unknowingly recorded Nolan on their phones without realizing it at the time. That effort is directly tied to closing this specific gap, and it is part of why the Jackson County Sheriff's Office has repeatedly and publicly asked anyone who was on Horn Island that day to come forward with any photos or videos they might have. Katie McCormack's account, delivered through her family, says Nolan told her during that conversation that he intended to head back and rejoin his friends. She never watched him actually do it. That distinction is worth sitting with, because it is easy to treat her account as though it closes the gap described above. It does not. It tells us what Nolan said he planned to do. It does not tell us whether he actually did it, or what happened in the minutes after that conversation ended if something changed his plan. The gap between his stated intention and his confirmed physical location before entering the water remains open, regardless of whose version of that final conversation turns out to be more accurate. Katie's mother, Gracie McCormack, has been specific about this exact nuance in her public statements. She told the Daily Mail that Katie assumed Nolan was getting ready to board the boat he arrived on, and that Katie assumed the friends who were telling him to get on would not have left without him. That word, assumed, appears twice in that single statement, and it is doing significant work. It is the family's own careful acknowledgement that Katie's account is built on a reasonable inference drawn from a real conversation, not a direct observation of what actually followed. Gracie McCormack also confirmed that Katie was on the island with an entirely different group of friends that day, and that she later left with her brother and his fiancée. Whatever happened to Nolan after that specific conversation concluded, Katie was simply not present to witness it. Her account establishes what Nolan said. It cannot establish what Nolan did. The friend group's account, that Nolan chose to stay behind with Katie, has been described consistently across multiple separate interviews from Traycon Shepard to Warren Hudson. That consistency deserves to be taken seriously. Consistent accounts across multiple separate tellings carry real evidential weight. But consistency by itself does not resolve the deeper question. Multiple friends agreeing on the same account tells investigators that those individuals are either describing the same genuine shared understanding or the same coordinated story. The consistency alone cannot determine which of those two things is actually occurring. And notably, none of the friends who have spoken publicly so far have described directly witnessing the specific moment Nolan made the decision to stay, or watching him in the time immediately before the boat departed without him. Attorney Benjamin Crump has framed this as the central unresolved contradiction in the entire case. His argument is straightforward. Katie's account says Nolan was heading toward the boat, and the friends say he chose not to get on it, so someone must not be telling the truth. That framing is emotionally direct and understandable. It is also, on close examination, somewhat narrower than the situation actually requires. It is entirely possible for Katie's account and the friend group's account to both reflect honest memories of the same afternoon if something changed in the gap between Nolan's stated intention and whatever ultimately happened, if that gap contains events that neither Katie nor the friends directly witnessed. Requiring one side to be lying assumes the accounts are addressing exactly the same moment. They may not be. The independent autopsy findings need to be brought directly into this framework because they intersect with all three realistic possibilities in different ways. Dr. Roger Mitchell's examination found no lacerations, no fractures, and no other deep tissue injuries anywhere on Nolan's body, aside from one area of unexplained discoloration at the back of his head. The absence of widespread physical injury leans against the most serious possibility in meaningful ways. A violent altercation severe enough to contribute to a death would typically leave more than a single ambiguous finding behind. At the same time, the report explicitly states that the examining pathologist cannot rule out intervening non-accidental factors, specifically because the state had already retained certain neck structures before Dr. Mitchell's examination took place. That retention limited what he could independently confirm about potential neck trauma. The absence of those structures was not a minor procedural gap. It was a direct constraint on the conclusions the independent examination could legitimately reach. Dr. Mitchell's report lists specific unanswered questions that remain open as of his examination. How Nolan entered the water, whether he sustained any neck injuries, whether there was any brain bleeding, and what was found in his stomach. Every one of those questions maps directly onto one of the three possibilities this case currently supports: a straightforward physiological explanation consistent with accidental drowning, decomposition that simply obscures an otherwise unremarkable death, or something more serious, requiring exactly the kind of neck trauma assessment that the state's retained structures were meant to help clarify and that the independent exam could not fully address on its own. None of those questions has been answered publicly. All of them remain open. A crime expert speaking with News Nation raised a specific analytical tool that is worth applying directly to where this case stands: the value of testing the friend group's account against the boat's actual time-stamped GPS movement data. The friends gave their account of that day to family members and to investigators before the GPS tracking data became public. As this expert noted, if their story does not match completely with what the boat's own tracked movements show, they are going to have a significant problem. That is a genuinely useful test precisely because it does not depend on judging anyone's character or deciding in advance who is more credible. It simply compares a human account, given without any knowledge of what an objective record would eventually show, against that same objective record once it was available. A human account shaped by honest memory and an objective time-stamped record should align in their essential structure if the account was given honestly. This matters differently depending on which possibility turns out to be accurate. Under a clean, accidental scenario, the friend group's account should track closely with the GPS data, because there would be no reason for anyone to have shaped their story toward any particular narrative. Under the middle possibility, panic-driven concealment after an accidental death, the GPS data might reveal small, understandable inconsistencies, timing details slightly off, without necessarily undermining the core of what the friends have described. Under the most serious possibility, larger and harder to explain discrepancies between the stated account and the boat's actual documented movements would represent the strongest currently available evidence pointing in that direction. As of this recording, no public reporting has identified a confirmed clear mismatch between the friend group's account and the GPS data. That does not eliminate any of the three possibilities. It means this particular evidentiary test has not yet produced a definitive public answer in either direction. The data exists. Its full implications for this case have not been publicly resolved. What does all of this mean for where the investigation actually goes from here? It means the real investigative work right now is not about choosing between three possibilities based on which one feels most plausible from the outside. It is about closing the specific evidentiary gap that keeps all three of them simultaneously viable. That requires finding any additional witnesses who were on Horn Island and may have seen Nolan during that unaccounted window, something the sheriff's office has publicly and repeatedly requested. It requires completing the forensic examination of Nolan's phone to determine whether anything was deliberately deleted or whether the phone's condition reflects something more straightforward. And it requires the toxicology results from both the state and independent autopsies, results that represent the one category of evidence capable of ruling out or confirming physiological factors that could directly explain what happened once Nolan entered the water. Until those specific pieces of evidence are resolved, this case will remain exactly where Jennifer Coffindaffer's own carefully measured statement leaves it: a reasonable professional lean toward an accident, sitting directly alongside a trained investigator's honest instinct that the public record is not yet complete. The institutional pressure surrounding this investigation has continued building entirely separate from any of the three evidentiary possibilities. The NOAACP has formally passed a resolution calling on local, state, and federal authorities, including the Department of Justice, to conduct a complete and transparent review of what happened to Nolan Wells. The reward for information leading to an arrest and conviction has grown to $125,000, funded jointly by Reverend Al Sharpton, Tyler Perry, and former NFL player Terrell Owens. None of that pressure moves this case toward any one of the three scenarios on its own. Public attention and financial incentive do not determine what the forensic evidence ultimately shows, but they do mean that whatever evidence eventually resolves this case will do so under a degree of national scrutiny that most cases involving a single contested death never receive. The investigators working this case know that every conclusion they reach will be examined, challenged, and debated at a national level. That accountability cuts in multiple directions simultaneously. It is worth closing on something that applies equally to every one of these three possibilities, and to every person watching this case from the outside. None of these scenarios requires assuming the worst about any specific named individual who has not been charged with anything. Nolan's friends have not been charged. The investigation is ongoing. The grand jury has not reached a conclusion. Treating any of these possibilities as established fact before the evidence confirms it does real damage to the integrity of the process and to the people caught inside it. None of these scenarios requires dismissing the Wells family's frustration as uninformed or purely emotional. Christine and Elmore Wells watched their son leave for a day on the water and never come home. They were told, within an hour of his body being found, that there was nothing suspicious about his death. Their refusal to accept that answer without more has been documented, consistent, and grounded in a specific institutional failure of communication that the record supports. And none of these scenarios is confirmed. That is the honest position. Not a comfortable one, not a satisfying one, but the honest one. What Jennifer Coffindaffer's measured assessment actually models better than most coverage of this case has managed is the discipline of holding a genuine lean toward one explanation while staying completely honest about how much remains genuinely unknown. That is harder than picking a side. It requires sitting with ambiguity when the emotional pull toward resolution is real and understandable. It also happens to be the most accurate position this case can currently occupy. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. Weeks after his death, the honest answer to what happened during that still unaccounted for window on Horn Island remains exactly that, honestly unknown. Not probably resolved, not likely explained, honestly unknown. The actual work of resolving what happened is moving forward, slowly, through witness interviews, forensic examination, and the patient accumulation of verified fact. That process does not accelerate because public pressure demands it. It resolves when the evidence is complete enough to support a conclusion that can withstand serious scrutiny. When the toxicology results arrive, we will cover them. When the phone forensics produce a verified finding, we will cover it. When the grand jury reaches a conclusion, we will be here. This case is not finished, and neither is this coverage. If this is the kind of true crime reporting you have been looking for, documented, careful, and willing to sit with genuine uncertainty rather than manufacture false certainty, then True Crime Revealed is where you need to be. Subscribe right now so you do not miss a single update as this case continues to develop. Every new development, every verified finding, every step this investigation takes toward finally closing that gap will be covered here the moment it can be confirmed. Like this video, if Nolan's story matters to you and you want this channel to keep following it with the seriousness it deserves, we will see you in the next one.